6 days before the biggest football tournament ever staged, an unexpected problem began to emerge. The world was preparing for a celebration of football, but behind the excitement, organizers were facing questions they never expected to answer. In Arlington, Texas, reports suggested that hundreds of thousands of seats across upcoming matches remained unsold. One of the tournament's most iconic venues, AT&T Stadium, still had a significant amount of available inventory shortly before kickoff. For an event expected to break every record, the numbers surprised many observers. At first glance, empty seats might seem like a simple ticketing issue. But as journalists, football executives, and fan groups looked deeper, they discovered a much larger story. The concerns were no longer limited to stadium attendance. Questions were being raised about pricing, scheduling, fan accessibility, and the overall direction of modern football. Across Europe, several football organizations had already voiced concerns about FIFA's growing tournament calendar. The expansion of major competitions meant more matches, longer seasons, and increased pressure on players. Critics argued that football was becoming increasingly driven by commercial growth rather than sporting balance. Leagues and player representatives claimed that important decisions affecting clubs and athletes were being made without sufficient consultation. Their concern was simple. As tournaments grew larger, players were being asked to play more games with less recovery time. These debates had moved far beyond television discussions and social media arguments. Formal complaints had reached major European institutions, turning football's calendar into a legal and political issue. For the first time in years, the governance of the global game was being examined from multiple angles. Yet despite the controversy, one fact remained unchanged. The tournament was about to begin. As the tournament countdown continued, another debate gained momentum: player welfare. For years, footballers had spoken about crowded schedules, but now those concerns were being echoed by unions, leagues, and legal organizations across Europe. The modern football calendar has expanded dramatically. Domestic leagues, continental competitions, international breaks, and newly enlarged tournaments have created a schedule unlike anything seen before. While fans enjoy more football than ever, many players argue that the physical cost is becoming impossible to ignore. Several player representatives warned that recovery periods were shrinking while expectations continue to grow. Football at the highest level demands intense physical and mental effort, and critics claim that the current structure risks pushing athletes beyond reasonable limits. Injuries, fatigue, and burnout became central themes in the discussion. What made this situation different was that concerns were no longer being expressed only in interviews. Formal complaints and legal challenges were beginning to enter European institutions. Organizations representing professional players argued that workload protections needed to be strengthened and that athletes deserved a greater voice in decisions that directly affected their careers. At the same time, supporters of FIFA's expansion plans argued that larger tournaments create opportunities for more nations, more players, and more fans around the world. They pointed to football's global growth and the increasing demand for international competitions. This created a difficult debate with no easy answers. One side emphasized player health and sustainable scheduling. The other highlighted growth, inclusion, and the worldwide popularity of the game. As the World Cup approached, these arguments remained unresolved. The matches would go ahead, but the conversation surrounding football's future was becoming just as significant as the football itself. While legal disputes and player concerns dominated headlines, another issue was becoming impossible to ignore: fans. Football's greatest tournaments have always relied on supporters creating unforgettable atmospheres. Yet many observers noticed signs that attendance expectations were not being fully met. Reports from several venues suggested that ticket sales had progressed more slowly than anticipated. Analysts pointed to multiple factors, including travel expenses, accommodation costs, and ticket pricing. For many supporters, attending the tournament required a significant financial commitment that extended far beyond the cost of admission. Fan organizations argued that football's biggest events should remain accessible to ordinary supporters. They warned that rising prices risked transforming major tournaments into experiences available primarily to wealthier audiences and corporate guests. Questions were also raised about ticket availability. Some market observers noted unusual fluctuations in visible inventory on official sales platforms. Although explanations varied, the discussion fueled speculation among supporters who were already frustrated by pricing concerns. Hotels in several host regions faced their own challenges. Many businesses had expected an enormous surge in bookings, yet some operators reported demand levels below their original forecasts. This created uncertainty for companies that had spent months preparing for a tourism boom. Despite these concerns, football history offers an important reminder. Great tournaments are often remembered not for their early controversies, but for the moments that unfold once the games begin. Dramatic goals, unforgettable performances, and emotional victories can quickly change public perception. The challenge facing organizers was clear. They needed to convince fans that the World Cup remained. As kickoff finally approached, the World Cup stood at the center of one of football's most important debates in decades. On one side was the promise of growth. More teams, more matches, and greater global representation than ever before. On the other was a growing belief that football risked losing sight of the people who make the sport what it is, players and supporters. The criticism directed toward FIFA was not limited to a single issue. It combined concerns about scheduling, ticket pricing, fan access, player welfare, and the increasing commercialization of elite football. Each issue alone might have been manageable. Together, they created a wave of scrutiny unlike anything seen in recent years. Yet football has always possessed a unique ability to rise above controversy. Once the whistle blows, attention shifts to the players. The arguments taking place in meeting rooms, court filings, and boardrooms suddenly compete with goals, celebrations, heartbreak, and history. That reality offered organizers a degree of optimism. A spectacular tournament could change the narrative. Memorable matches and passionate crowds could remind the world why football remains the planet's most popular sport. However, the deeper questions would not disappear when the final trophy was lifted. Legal cases, institutional reviews, and debates over the future structure of international football are likely to continue long after the tournament ends. For many observers, this World Cup represents more than a competition. It is a test of how football balances growth with responsibility. Can the sport expand while protecting players? Can it generate record revenues while remaining accessible to supporters? Can global ambition coexist with the traditions that built the game? The answers will not be decided in a single match or a single tournament. But as the world watches football's biggest stage, those questions have never felt more important.